Yeah, it is really interesting how certain things get bad raps. You know, we're just talking about melatonin. A lot of people like talk shit on it, but we were just talking about you and what you've been researching about melatonin. And it really made us, we had like 3 car rides or so together where like we just kept going through it. And it's like, man, maybe there's got to be a lot more to it. You know, so like what's going on with melatonin before I even introduce who we're talking to?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's just go straight in. So no foreplay. So when it comes to melatonin, we think of melatonin as like a sleep hormone. It often gets used and prescribed as a sleep aid, and it's not necessarily a bad sleep aid, but I don't think it's the most effective sleep aid. It's not a tranquilizer. And a lot of the time people go, oh, melatonin doesn't work for me. And I think that they're looking for like a actual, tranquilizer kind of effect. They're looking for like a chemical brick to the head. And it's never going to do that, which is actually a good thing. So the reason why I like melatonin, there's quite a few, but when we look at what melatonin is biologically, it's one of your body's chief antioxidants. So the glutathione, which we were speaking about before off air, and melatonin, they're your body's 2 endogenous antioxidants. The body makes them naturally. And melatonin disruption has been present since we discovered fire to some degree. And especially now in the modern world with electricity, phones, lights, I mean, it would be virtually impossible unless you biohacked to the nth degree to have optimal melatonin production. I got into melatonin because melatonin production is reduced when you're in chronic pain. And I've got 2 issues with my spine.
Son of a bitch.
And yeah, this is where a lot of people go, oh, fuck. So if you're someone who physically finds it, like I physically find it uncomfortable to get to sleep. I'm often kind of moving around, tossing and turning to find new positions. And I've got like a maternity pillow that I like a spoon. Like I've got the whole thing set up. But when you're in pain, your body's not producing melatonin the way it should.
Wow.
So I became much more interested in melatonin when I got into high dose melatonin because 3 milligrams, 5 milligrams, I mean, it was useful, but it wasn't something that I'd really bother talking about.
Yeah.
Once I got into 10, 20, 50, 100 milligrams and beyond, this is when I started noticing being like, okay, this is having a profound impact on my life.
Wow.
And one of the things that shows me that I'm doing something right is sometimes my wife will take a look at me and she goes, what are you doing? And I'm like, what do you mean? And she's like, I want what you're taking. Like your skin looks better. What is it? And I was like, it's the fucking melatonin. So that got me down the rabbit hole of melatonin because its effect as an antioxidant is so profound and it is so supportive for people who are in chronic pain and people particularly who are working late on the computers. I think there are so many people who could benefit from it. And another thing that's worth noting as well is that androgens antagonize melatonin receptors as well. So if you're on a supraphysiological dose of testosterone, you actually need supraphysiological doses of melatonin to allow you to have proper sleep cycles.
Interesting.
So it's not going to offset, a gram of tren keeping you awake all night, but
damn it.
Yeah. You need the strongest.
We don't
stuff
do
for
that anymore.
Yeah, good. But it's also something to consider that if you're going to be walking around with optimal androgen levels in an environment which your melatonin production is getting reduced due to artificial light, I would propose that melatonin is almost necessitated on TRT.
Man, and that's a really great point because every single person that's on TRT is technically at a super physiological dose because let's be real, like you don't want to just be normal. We want to be optimal, right? And when you do a correct HRT, when you do TRT correctly, like if you wanted to do it really correctly, it would only be like 74 milligrams a week or whatever your body naturally makes, 60, 64, whatever it is.
Someone's come up with that number. I think it's bullshit. I've looked into it. There's actually no factual basis for that. But yeah, I know exactly what you mean. If we're going to replace the hypergonadal testosterone levels that made us symptomatic in the first place, then we're not really going to get very far with it. It's pretty much a redundant waste of time. If we're going to be hijacking the body's endocrine system, we want to do the best job we possibly can because it's the same amount of injections anyway. And if you just draw a little bit more oil in and you can take your levels from okay and passable to optimal, but stay under that ceiling, which would push you into a level that would cause side effects. This is when you can actually get life-changing results from treatment, especially, I mean, all of us have been on this for quite some time. And I think that's where the benefits really come through is the chronic exposure to these optimal androgen levels.
Yeah. It's interesting. You mentioned the maternity pillow and all that stuff. And I have to go to sleep in the same position with the pillow under the leg and all this stuff. And, I've got, metal in my back and a head injury and all this stuff. And I was a strongman for years and it crushed my body, doing that. And so I'm like hyper interested in
Maternity pillows?
Somebody had maternity pillows. Yeah. Are you selling them? Like,
Well, you had Luke Lehman on a couple of days ago, right?
who is it?
Luke Lehman?
No.
Oh, you haven't had Luke Lehman on. You should get Luke Lehman on. So
Okay.
Luke was someone who put me onto it a while ago because he was like, this is a maternity pillow and it's just like it's like a giant U that shapes up the whole bed. So you can kind of like spoon it and put your leg on it and it doesn't get too hot. And once I got into that position, I was like, oh, this is actually opening up my hips and my back and it's taking the stress off the lower spine. And that made a huge, huge difference.
Yeah.
So men, listen up. As you can already tell, we have somebody in the house today you want to listen to.
Yep.
Dave Lee, all the way from Lithuania. advancedfundamentalhealth.com. I'm Dave Lee on Instagram. We're going to dive into a lot of what you've already had a taste of. We really want to figure out how we can truly optimize not just our test levels, but our whole health of our body, especially when it comes to taking TRT. So we're going to dive into all those things today. I'm excited to have you here.
Yes.
And great beard. I didn't mention that yet.
Thank you for having me. I mean, likewise. I mean, we all seem to be growing the facial hair pretty well.
So. Fellow beardsmen.
Yeah. We have one of our friends was on Spencer a couple weeks ago. He owns Live Bearded, just phenomenal beard products. But like products aside, it's just cool to like be around guys that get like having a beard. You know what I mean?
I can't disagree with that.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Dude, when it comes to like this maternity pillow thing, does it also like touch your back a bit? Like, can you kind of like roll? Are you like a side sleeper or like, what does it let you do?
Yeah, so basically it's kind of like a giant U-shaped pillow that's like as long as you are tall. So basically you can kind of like, you have it on either side of you and then you can like chuck a leg over it. You can kind of like, you can get in all different positions with it. But for me, like during the night, I probably move into a whole bunch of different positions and I find the most comfortable position for me to fall asleep in is on my stomach, kind of like to the side with one leg up. But that's not the most comfortable position for me to wake up in. So I found that when I got the maternity pillow, it took me a little while to get used to it, but it basically allowed me to stay in that side sleeping position with a good amount of support because, I mean, your shoulders are way bigger than mine, but when I got bigger shoulders, you realize that creates a bigger gap between the shoulder and the head, so you need more support. So I think for a long time, I was like craning my head forward and like I was definitely making the situation a lot worse. So getting into that maternity pillow, when I first got it, my wife thought I was an idiot. And then and I maybe thought I was an idiot at first. And after a couple of days, I was like, no, this is the real deal. Yeah.
That's cool. I asked because I have a compressed disc in L5S1 on my back that I've been working on for a long time, especially this year. It's been really bad. But I've realized that on my couch, I got a pretty sweet leather couch that has like a hard backing almost.
Yeah.
When I lay on my back and kind of like lean back into it on my side.
Yeah.
My pain's almost gone.
Yeah.
And it's almost impossible to replicate in the bed.
Yeah.
So I'm always trying to see, okay, how can I possibly like support myself? Because if I fall one way or another, I think that's where I start to twist my hips. And then I just wake up like an old man stretching before on my way to the bathroom, you know?
Yeah. So that's exactly, I have the same issue with my back as well. And that's exactly it. The position where you get comfortable. And then as you move around through the night, like sometimes I wake up in the morning and like my lower back would just feel like dead and just like quite heavy and sore.
Yeah.
But yeah, when I've got that pillow, I'm good to go. So if I could have fit it in my suitcase, I would have brought it with me.
Yeah.
At the moment, I kind of like rig my own setup in the hotel. I get them to send more pillows up and I kind of like have this pillow fort that I'm sleeping on. But once you find the thing that works for that to kind of make the pain more manageable, it's really important to get on top of that. And this is something that I'm speaking about tomorrow in my keynote. I've spoken about it before in my lectures on YouTube. Is that when the body is chronically inflamed, whether it's pain, gut dysbiosis, whatever you've got going on, it actually down-regulates your body's ability to manufacture, synthesize, and it also increases the reuptake of dopamine. So pain is anti-dopaminergic. And if someone's got, maybe if you don't drink enough water and you get a headache, you can kind of like put that aside and focus on your stuff. But when you're in chronic pain over time, we have to look at dopamine as a hormonal product in the body as well. So when you're in the situation when you're constantly in pain, you might psychologically be able to kind of put the pain aside and work through it temporarily. But over time, it is absolutely sapping your cognitive function, your quality of life, it's down-regulating your metabolism, your ability to grow muscle. All of these factors are impacted by dopamine. So I think people who are in pain, it's great to find, ways to manage it in the short term, but if you can find things that help you deal with it and maybe also support the issue resolving in the long term, I think that's something that people should really focus on. So
blasting a gram of melatonin.
Yeah, basically just melatonin cycles. So when it comes to the melatonin thing, melatonin gets a bad rap for a couple of reasons. One reason it gets a bad rap for is people think that it will have a negative feedback loop, kind of like if you take testosterone. This was very thoroughly debunked, and there was a study in about 2010 or 11. If people want to fact check me on this, go to examine.com, which is a great website which kind of summarizes a lot of nutraceuticals and compounds. And they actually have an FAQ, and if you click the FAQ about, does melatonin impact natural production, they've got a really good article where they've cited all the studies to show that this is not the case. So I'm not sure why this myth is still being perpetuated. If it's I
think maybe just because it's a hormone.
Yeah.
And that's just what, if you're replacing a hormone, you're going to ruin your body's ability to make it. So,
and that to me makes sense from a superficial level. Like we know that hormones like testosterone as well as thyroid, there's negative feedback mechanisms, but they haven't identified a negative feedback mechanism with melatonin. And they've even done studies where they've given people insane amounts and noted that the melatonin production upon withdrawal the following night is not impacted at all.
Wow.
So up until this point, we would say, look, you should only take melatonin if you're like changing time zones, doing shift work, stuff like that. Sure. That's gone. So the other studies on melatonin, and it's interesting because every time I put up a podcast, I get some dickhead in the comments who thinks they understand science because they've got YouTube or they've got Google and they don't actually read the study they're citing. So there's one idea that melatonin causes problems with puberty. In young boys, if you give boys melatonin, it will delay their puberty. It was a group of boys who already had delayed onset puberty and they had youthful melatonin levels. So it was a chicken or the egg thing, but it was pretty clear that the other one came first. But the other problem with melatonin is that a lot of the studies on melatonin are done on rats. Rats are nocturnal. So if you give rats melatonin at night, it's not going to do the same thing as if you give a human melatonin at night. It would be like having melatonin in the morning for a human. So all the negative stuff that you see on melatonin, you got to check, is it in rats and they gave it at night, or are they looking at a correlation causation thing?
Yeah.
And when we look at the impact of melatonin in terms of what it does mechanistically, it's basically it's very similar to glutathione. It's one of the body's ultimate antioxidants. And I'm actually referencing the work of John Lawrence. I'm probably pronouncing his name wrong, but he's got a book called The Miracle Molecule where he talks about supplementing glutathione and melatonin together at night to help your body recover. And this has been one of my favorite protocols for my clinics. We compound it together in the same capsule. And this is a phenomenal way that people can address the ramifications of living with pain.
That's amazing. So when guys are listening to this and they're like, okay, I've heard enough. I want to try this. I have pain or whatever. Like, where do they need to start? Because melatonin you can get kind of anywhere. You can get, you can lozenge it. You can do all these different ways. Like, what do you guys need to know about getting into it?
Yeah, you use my affiliate code. No, I don't. I did some. I hate that. So yeah, look, melatonin in most countries is over the counter, or if it's not over the counter, you can just buy it. There's not strict import bans. Like in Australia, you can buy it from like iHerb and Amazon. And most people can get access to melatonin pretty easily. Not all melatonin is created equally, and if possible, it is going to be ideal to get melatonin in what's called a micronized form, which means that the form of it is so tiny that when you swallow the capsule, it actually skips the metabolism in the liver, which is called first pass, and then it starts to absorb in the gut lining. The advantage of this is that it kind of absorbs like food, so it's got like a pseudo-sustained release, which allows your body to gradually absorb melatonin in a more bioavailable fashion over like a 6 to 7 hour period, which is perfect.
Interesting.
You can also get it as a rectal suppository if you really want to optimize the bioavailability, but the compliance for that, I imagine, is quite low. So that is another option though. I don't recommend that. When it comes to the melatonin capsules, most melatonin that you buy online is just regular melatonin, which is fine. It's not something that people shouldn't use. It's not harmful. But if you get it prescribed from a compounding pharmacy, or you specifically get a micronized form, which some over-the-counter versions are, if you look on the label, there's actually a patented form called Microactive. That's a brand name version. So if people search Microactive, one word, melatonin on Google, you'll find some products that will come up.
Okay.
I've had so many people, including family members actually, who've taken the regular form and been like, this is a sugar pill, it doesn't do anything. And then I'll give them the micronized version. I won't tell them it's a different version, so they can't have a placebo effect, and they go, this one works. So The micronized version is far superior. It's not necessary, but it's much better if you can get it. So I always recommend, if possible, to get it prescribed from a compounding pharmacy through your doctor or provider. So that way you know exactly what you're getting and you can get the right dose compounded that you want to work with.
I think especially if you're going with the higher dosages too, it's a lot better to have that kind of slow drip.
Definitely.
You know, especially if you're taking it as a, you know, if you are taking it as a, you know, before sleep or whatever, having a 6 or 7 hour drip of melatonin would be amazing instead of taking 50 to 100 milligrams and it all kind of, you know, hitting you at once.
Correct.
Like, that's awesome. Okay.
Especially if you're in pain, because that's going to allow you to stay asleep because it's going to give you that slow release antioxidant effect.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was going to ask, like, how many of these effects are coming from the better quality sleep? And is there anything actually coming from the melatonin as like a supplement?
Yep.
Or is it mostly because we're getting better sleep, now we can recover and all that?
That's a very good distinction and question. When we look in the literature, most of the benefits that we look at for melatonin are the acute effects, the mechanistic acute effects. We don't have a whole lot of data showing the benefits of long-term supplementation. But if we know that there are these benefits from the acute effects and we understand that the mechanistic theory would apply long-term, that's when we can extrapolate out. But most of the benefits are from acute dosing, which I think is fascinating because I'm the most interested when it comes to supplements in terms of being like, what can I start doing now for decades that's going to impact where I'm going to end up when I'm, 50 or 60 or 70 years old.
Yep.
And I think that's where a lot more people are starting to look at supplementation, is being like, how can we look at this as a longevity agent, but also something that can improve the short-term quality of life that we're having at the moment. If we can take something that's going to make me feel better today, but live better in 10 or 20 years, that's what I'm interested in. I'm not really interested in finding, medications or peptides or research chemicals that are going to allow me to feel fantastic right now, but then may have ramifications in the long term.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I'm 41 and I have a little, 6-year-old and I've got some 20-year-olds and like I have a lot more life. And I don't want to like ever think about going downhill. So I'm like, okay, what am I doing now? So one of the things I am doing now is working on my gut health for the first time.
Right.
Like, prebiotics, probiotics, really watching what I'm eating, like GI relief and all these different things just to help with that. Cause I know how much comes from the gut. Like you're just saying, you like to get the melatonin in through the gut lining.
Yep.
So when it comes to TRT on that topic, that's one thing that a lot of guys are like, well, I don't want to take it for the rest of my life. Or two, is it potentially dangerous for me? Is there a reason that I shouldn't be on it? Should I just keep lower T for a health reason, for longevity? So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, TRT is what I would call a highly invasive treatment. It's not as invasive as maybe getting, open heart surgery, but it's invasive because once you start doing it, you shut down your body's ability to produce it long term.
Yeah.
And the longer you're on it, the less of a chance that your body is going to recover that production naturally. However, if we're talking about testosterone replacement therapy, it shouldn't be started unless you need it in the first place. So I would liken it to finding out that you're a type 1 diabetic. If you've got hypogonadism that can't be resolved, you need to take the hormone that your body's not making. If you find out as an adult that you've got type 1 diabetes, you need to take insulin. And that's the importance of this. And I think that if people are on the fence being like, oh, I don't want to shut down my natural production, then you probably don't need TRT, because if your natural production is shot to shit like mine was when I started, there was nothing to lose. There's nothing to recover.
Same.
So I think that there's a lot of people who are looking at TRT for maybe a kind of like looking at it as like a biohack, being like, well, I don't really need this, but I'd love to have higher testosterone levels. And I'm actually not against that approach, as long as people understand what they're doing, because we all get one life, we all get one shot at this. And as someone who's been on both sides of the fence, high testosterone and low testosterone, this side of the fence is way better.
So much better.
And the thing that I'm the most interested in, I started this when I was 25 and I'm 32 now, maybe 24. I know that when I'm 40 or 50, I'm going to be in a very different place, both as a person and circumstantially, based on the exposure to androgens, because I would have made better decisions. I'd be lower stress. I'd have better energy. I'd be more mentally driven towards pushing outside my comfort zone and taking on risks and challenges, rather than being avoidant and passive, which is what I was growing up. And it didn't work out very well for me. So if people are going to do this, I'm an advocate for people doing what is in their best interest. And TRT is a big commitment, but if people are willing to make that commitment, as long as they understand that it is a lifelong intervention in their endocrine system, then I think that it's a fantastic choice that people can make. It's if people want to do it electively, as long as they understand what they're doing, there's not really much you can do from a supplemental standpoint that will come close to optimizing your hormone levels. So it's a big commitment. It's a big life upgrade, but most importantly, it comes with the responsibility. It's like the Spider-Man thing, like great power comes great responsibility. And it's really important that if guys are going to do this, you do it right. If you need brain surgery, you're not going to go on Google and be like, who's the cheapest surgeon who can cut my brain open? You're not going to do that because that's just like, that's laughable, right? Like that's dumb. But people do that with TRT. They go, what's the cheapest clinic? You know, every surgeon uses the same fucking scalpel. It's not the same outcome. So it's very important that if you're going to do this, you recognize that someone is basically performing ongoing surgery on your hormone system forever. So you need someone who knows what they're doing. And what I like to look at is that TRT is like an investment, and the amount that if you're going to pay this much for a shitty provider and it's, 30% more for an expert provider, you will not only make that money back in your increased earning potential, but you're going to make that money back in your quality of life. Plus 100%. TRT done wrong can cause harm. I mean, if you have poor cardiovascular health, you're obese, you're drinking a bunch of alcohol excessively, and you're creating all these health problems for yourself, and then you come in and give yourself the testosterone levels of the healthy 21-year-old Giga Chad, that's not going to work. If you put a Lamborghini engine into a Suzuki Swift and try to race it, that thing's going to fall apart. Yep. And this is what a lot of guys it's happening to a lot of guys.
Yep.
Man, that's a great analogy.
Yeah, that's
like
a really.
I have like beat that one to death.
That's I love that one. Well, we haven't heard it yet. So no, that's great. And it highlights the need for the habit portion of it. And it's like, no, if you're gonna go on this journey, if you're gonna go on this TRT journey, a couple of things. Number one, just know science is going 1,000,000 miles an hour, and we already have things like Chirexin, and it's going in the direction where you probably don't have to stab yourself with a needle every week forever. Maybe, right? Maybe not. But once you do it for 6 weeks, you'll never go back anyways. Yeah. So there's that portion. But the other side of that is like, when you do this, you also have to take your habits into account. You also have to understand that, like, oh no, I'm on this health journey, and it's not that this is going to fix all my problems. That's just like an ancillary tool that is going to enhance your better sleep and your better, habits with alcohol, or your better, whatever it is. Right. And I think that's something that a lot of guys don't understand, where it's like, they think this thing's going to fix it. It's like, well, no, this over here is going to fix it. This is kind of the vehicle in which it's going to help happen,
Yeah, you mentioned getting stabbed. I'd like to ask you about like the different ways to get it and where you think maybe science is going.
Sure.
Because it is kind of a pain in the butt. I'd stab every fourth day. Okay. I do like a half dose every 4 days, and that's been working good for me instead of getting the big peak and valley of a full shot. But I've been considering doing like a microdose. Like using a little insulin needles. And I hear all these, now there's like new technology coming where some of it can be like lozenge, and it actually is getting in the bloodstream, I guess. And so like, where do you think this is going to give some guys hope possibly of like, maybe I don't have to stab myself forever, because maybe there's new technology that's going to work for me, and it's a combination maybe. Yeah.
And this is the exciting field. And I mean, my undergrad was originally in marketing. And my skeptic hat, putting that on, is that every new delivery method that they've hyped for testosterone forever has not eventuated. I mean, Sustanon was meant to be so that you could have these multiple esters that would all peak and trough in alignment, so you could do. It didn't work. And the most recent one that we use a lot in Australia, and when I say we, I mean other practitioners, not my clinics, is Nebido or Reandron, which is injectable testosterone undecanoate. That's 3 shots a year. That sounds fantastic. If that worked, we'd all do it. Doesn't work. So when it comes to these new delivery mechanisms, if they actually, like, if there is a way to optimize and stabilize androgen levels with 2 or 3 pills a day, sign me up. Until that's actually proven, I'm going to remain very skeptical of whether that will actually eventuate. So at the moment, when it comes to testosterone, I think there are 2, and I'm going to put cypionate and enanthate as one thing. They're basically Coke and Pepsi. They're so similar that for the purpose of argument, I'm going to call them the same thing. There's 2 methods of testosterone administration that I would consider gold standard. And one is your enanthate and cypionate shots, which is by far the most popular. And the other one is a compounded transscrotal cream. And this is a cream that's compounded in a enhanced bioavailability form, and it's compounded at a much stronger dose than a typical topical. So typically a topical would be 1, 2, maybe 5%. We're talking 20% applied to the scrotum twice a day. It's usually about maybe half the amount of toothpaste you put on a toothbrush. Put it onto a shaved ball sack twice a day. There's pros and cons to that. Pros, you don't have to stab yourself. Cons, it can transfer through intimacy. So you got to wash that off. But I think it's polite to have a shower before you have sex anyway. So it's not.
Don't be gross.
Yeah, unless you're going around rubbing your scrotum on people. And I think that if you're doing that, people are probably going to have more of an issue with the act itself rather than the transference. It's not really a problem. So the advantage of the cream, and this is something that I'm very interested in terms of the mechanisms of the different delivery methods, is that when you use a cream, you get much more preferential conversion to DHT. Mm-hmm. And this can be very advantageous for people who naturally have suppressed DHT production, which are from things like chronic pain, obesity, liver disease, and hypothyroidism, which often needs to be picked up as well. This subset of people forms a lot of the people in the TRT space who are having side effects. So the cream can often represent a solution for people who would be more side effect prone to actually get the benefits of treatment until they can actually get their habits together. A lot of the guys choose to stay on the cream. I use the cream myself just in terms of convenience. And it's a fantastic alternative. If we can have an option that is just as good as injections, and in some circumstances might be even better than injections, that sounds great. When it comes to injecting testosterone cypionate or enanthate, these medications have a half-life of about 5 to 10 days, depending on the study. And those studies will vary based on the carrier oil they use and also how deep they actually inject it into the muscle. That seems to impact the pharmacodynamics. So what a half-life of a medication means, and sometimes people conflate this with what's called mean residence time, which is like how long the medication is actually effective for. Like caffeine has a half-life of 8 hours. This coffee is not going to keep me buzzing for 8 hours.
Right.
We know that. So when we're looking at how testosterone works, when it's cypionate and enanthate, it tends to peak within about 24 to 48 hours, depending on the guy. And then you start to end up on this downward trajectory. The late Dr. John Crisler, who was a mentor of mine, he was very into the idea that maybe it's less so about the level of testosterone and it's more so the direction in which the testosterone is moving. So what I recommend for my clients is twice a week injections with these tiny little insulin syringes. If I had one here, I'd stick one in my shoulder to prove a point. That it's virtually painless, tiny little pinprick. And the smaller the needle and the smaller the dose, the smaller the muscle you can put it in. So tiny little shot, less than half a mil into the shoulder, quick and easy. Twice a week, it keeps it very stable. 3 times a week keeps it even more stable.
I personally do 3 times a week with an insulin needle, and it works great.
And what I recommend for people is that if you're in poor metabolic health, start with 3 times a week, because poor metabolic health translates to poor liver health. Poor liver health means you're not going to cleave that ester very well, which is what gives it the long half-life. But twice a week, a lot of guys can get away with. Everyone, except for masochists, want to stab themselves as little as possible. When you start TRT, you go, oh, cool. And then you kind of get excited about it. And then the novelty wears off and you go, oh, fuck. But the juice is absolutely worth the squeeze when it comes to this. But the longer it goes on, the less often you want to inject. And I think that the differentiation between 2 shots a week and 3 shots a week for some guys is a game changer.
It's huge, yeah.
But going to that's 1 more injection a week. Going from 3 injections a week to every day, now we're adding in 4 more injections a week for a medication that's already got a week-long half-life. That to me is what we would call the point of diminishing returns. So I find that the best protocol, when people say what's the best protocol, it's like, well, it depends on the individual. But if we have to say what is the best protocol for injectable testosterone, I would say cypionate 3 times a week into the deltoid with a 27 or a 29 gauge insulin syringe, or for a cream, a 20% transscrotal cream in a HRT base applied to the scrotum twice a day.
I have a whole box of 31 gauge for my peptides that I'm using. You think that's too small for this?
Depends on your level of patience.
So take a while to push through the oil.
It also depends on the viscosity of the oil, which is the fancy term that makes me sound smart for thickness of the oil. So when we're looking at the oil that testosterone comes in the US, you guys typically default to grapeseed or sesame, which is quite thin. In Australia, we default to like castor oil, which is like goo. Like that stuff, you can barely push that through a 27.
Right.
So I prefer, where possible, and I advise all the clinics that I coach to compound testosterone in MCT oil where possible, because that stuff's closer to water. You could, like I drew up 0.5 ml into a 29 gauge syringe this morning and timed it for one of my clients. It took 8 seconds. So that was 0.5 ml. So you could probably do it with a 31, but the problem with the 31s is they tend to be 8 ml long.
Yep.
And unless you're like stage lean, you're not going to be able to get that deep enough into the muscles. So 27 gauge, so the higher the number for people listening, the thicker the needle. So the 27 and 29 gauge 1/2 inch syringes are perfect. If you've got a smaller volume or a thinner oil, I think the difference between a 29 and a 27 is significant. I'd rather take the 29. But if you're using a thicker oil, or you're injecting like 0.4, 0.5 at a time, which takes a bit longer, then you might want to go for a 27.
Yeah, the first time I injected myself, when I was 26, probably, I used an 18 gauge.
Yeah. You can like see down the hole.
Yeah.
It's like a dart.
It's like a tunnel.
I had to tell everyone to get out of the house. And I'm sitting there with this it's like 18 gauge, 1.5 inches. And I'm just sitting there, just like looking at my quad, and it's like I'm just sweating, shaking. And I'm like, I don't know if I can do this long term. But tell you what, when it kicked in, I was like, oh, damn it. Like, I'm going to have to do this again.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's great that it's evolved now, because back then, I mean, this was, 7-8 years ago, like we didn't know anything about this stuff. And so what I think, just going back to the question that was posed previously, is that when pharmaceutical medications are made, they are patented by the company for 8 to 9 years. And this is so that they can recoup R&D costs, aka make an absolute killing. But there has to be incentive for pharmaceutical companies to develop new drugs. The option that I mentioned previously, the testosterone undecanoate, which is the injectable version of the new oral testosterone that people are talking about now, which is hyped to be all the rage, we'll see. That is the shot that they're saying you can take it every 12 weeks to 16 weeks. You can't do that. But what I think will happen when that medication goes generic, meaning that anyone can compound it at the same price as cypionate and enanthate, I think a once a week shot of that will be a game changer. If you could do a once a week shot, it's still 200 milligram per mil. If you could do a once a week shot of something that would give you the same stability as a daily cypionate injection, I think that's where it's going to go. So I'm not sure when the patent expires for Nebido and Reandron, but when that happens, I think we'll see a shift away from enanthate and cypionate towards injectable undecanoate. That would be my prediction.
I'm taking notes. I mean, that's amazing. I want to ask about some side effects that, do come up a lot for a lot of guys, like hair loss, your testes shrinking up, infertility, a lot of stuff.
All the good stuff.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of things that are like
Just
not
makes
necessarily
your dick look bigger. It's fine.
Yeah, they're not necessarily as small. So everything we've talked about here, like the cream, lower dosage, like what should guys consider when it comes to like understanding what they're getting into from that angle? Yeah,
I don't know anything about hair loss, but I'm giving my speech tomorrow and I'm mentioning hair loss and I'm putting up a whole bunch of photos. So I used to be in like an emo band when I was in my early 20s. You can probably tell by how I'm dressing. And I used to straighten it, dye it. I was devastated when I lost my hair. So I really understand when people are uncomfortable with the idea of hair loss. I mean, when I went to the barber, like I'm pretty sure I cried in the chair when he shaved it off.
Yeah.
And then I got over it like 2 days later. Life has dealt me a lot more challenges than losing my hair, I'll tell you that. But it's a tough thing to go through in your 20s because that's when you're forming your identity. That's when you're, coming to terms with who you are and how much value you can offer in the world. And I think if you lose your hair at that point, it can be very challenging for a lot of guys to go through that. But I also think it's an important rite of passage because it's not the most challenging thing you'll go through. Testosterone is not without drawbacks. And if it wasn't for these drawbacks, it would be a very quick conversation. It would be take some testosterone, you'll feel better.
Just take it.
It'll be why not?
Right.
So all of the why nots are what make it a serious commitment. And I don't think that any of the drawbacks are reasons not to do the treatment if it's needed. They're reasons not to do the treatment if it's not needed. So, if you are hypergonadal and you're dealing with the physiological and psychological devastating outcomes of that, losing your hair and having optimal testosterone levels, I mean, you're going to lose it anyway. If you've got male pattern baldness, it's just going to make it happen faster. Testosterone won't make you go bald unless you're genetically predisposed to it. So it's going to make the thing that's already happening happen faster. Thinning hair looks worse than being bald anyway. So rip the Band-Aid off. So that's something that people need to be aware of. The infertility and testicular atrophy are two important points. I've written a couple of books on TRT where I have gone into the realities of this. When I started my treatment, the consensus publicly around the fertility thing was a lot more accurate, which is that testosterone replacement therapy will complicate fertility. Now people are saying that TRT makes you infertile. If that was true, this would be the best, most popular means of birth control ever. This would be the male birth control that we would all be using. I have met plenty of guys who thought it would make them infertile. They are now fathers. So TRT does not make everyone infertile. It absolutely does not. I would argue that it does negatively affect everyone's fertility to at least a little bit of a degree, absolutely. But that does not mean that it's damaging your sperm or making you infertile. It just means that you might be producing a little bit less. You don't need 40 million sperm to achieve conception. Now, for some guys, though, it makes them completely azoospermic, which again, fancy word to make me sound smart, means no sperm, completely infertile. This is definitely not ideal. I mean, unless you're trying to use it for contraception. But this is something that comes with the territory with the treatment. One thing that I will add in to the conversation just from the get-go is that it takes a lot more than a sperm to be a father. I say any man can be a dad, not every man can be a father. If you are hypergonadal, you may be able to impregnate a woman, but good luck leading and keeping the family together and raising a kid. Good luck.
That's a great point.
And it's so important that men recognize that you have to achieve at least some degree of personal and professional mastery before you can think about starting and leading a family. It's very, very important that men can look after themselves first before they can look after others. It's like that if you're on a plane, you put your mask on first, oxygen mask first, then you fit it onto people who need it. And I think a lot of people don't consider the importance of that. So if TRT does render someone azoospermic, there are very effective fertility protocols for this, which are short-term. They bring your fertility back to the exact same biological circumstances if you stopped your treatment, but you're able to have optimal testosterone levels. One thing that I think is very important in this discussion is the epigenetic effect of testosterone. The question that people need to ask themselves is, if you could go back in time and pick who your father would be, would you want a high testosterone father to conceive you or a low testosterone father? The health of the parents impact the health of the baby. Everyone knows this. Healthy people have healthy children. So optimizing your testosterone levels if you need it, and then restoring your fertility while remaining on treatment is going to be the best thing for both yourself and your child. The fertility protocol, if people want to check out my ebook, I've got a free lecture called Beyond TRT on YouTube where I spell this all out. You can take it to your provider. It's all there for people. It's 250 units of HCG a day, which maximally stimulates luteinizing hormone receptors, and then 150 units of FSH 3 times a week, which will generally bring your FSH up to about a 4 or a 5, which is where it would typically be naturally. This allows men to generally restore their fertility in about 12 to 16 weeks, but it's very common for men to conceive in the first month or two.
Yeah, a buddy of mine, he's one of the first guys to squat 1,000 pounds raw. And, he did gear for years and years and years, and doctors all said he was infertile. And he did a protocol that was very similar to that, and his wife was pregnant in like 6 weeks.
Yep.
And I think it was HCG, HMG, and FSH, some sort of a amalgamation of those things, and she was pregnant in 6 weeks. The only thing they did do that he and I were like, well, if you're going to be on all this stuff, why not just continue the HRT? They had him stop TRT,
right?
For whatever reason, but then he jumped back on as soon as she was pregnant because fuck that.
Without sounding too critical, the reason for that is just basically incompetence. HCG is going to shut down your natural production anyway. So if you're using HCG in a physiological dose, which I mean for a man is 0, but in a dose that is going to mimic luteinizing hormone receptor activation, you are not gaining any benefit by stopping the TRT.
Sure.
Now, the thing that people need to be aware of is that Although, I mean, I know people who've conceived on grams of gear, including Tren. But for most guys, when we actually look at this clinically, is that if you are at a super physiological testosterone level, even with all the fertility drugs in the world, you're not going to get to optimal fertility. You might be able to recover it, but it's definitely important to keep the testosterone levels within the physiological range. So some guys will find, let's say you're taking like 150 milligrams of testosterone a week. Some guys, when they add that HCG in, it will actually increase their testosterone levels significantly. Other guys get no change. So if your testosterone levels are kind of running to the north end of physiology to begin with, sometimes it's worth backing the testosterone down just a little bit to compensate for that. Fertility drugs are expensive, so you don't want to waste, a couple of months of that treatment. But there's an art and the science. Again, this was a quote from Dr. Chrysler. There's an art and the science to TRT, and this is where I think the art side comes in terms of managing that. But yeah, there's no reason to stop TRT if someone's using HCG and FSH. It doesn't matter. And I would argue that it would actually be more beneficial to keep the TRT in because sex is a precursor to conceiving. Testosterone is going to increase sex drive. The more intercourse you can have during ovulation, the better chances you'll conceive. So it's also, to me, it's crazy that guys will like tank their libido and tank their androgenic health to try to conceive a kid. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense.
That was one of the things he was saying. He was like, I'm glad it happened in the first 6 weeks because he's like, I was getting to the point where I didn't even want to look at my wife because I had no libido. I had no sex drive. It was starting to tank, and they, he has some jokes about it that I won't tell on here, but I think we can all,
Yeah, for sure. I want to ask one more kind of a side effect question because I think this comes up on a lot of guys' minds, like myself included, is, like one of the top things that kills men is the heart.
Yep.
So when it comes to TRT, like just always in the back of my mind, I'm like always thinking about my heart, So I'm trying to be very adamant and consistent with, lifting weights and cardio and just doing everything I can to keep myself cardiovascularly healthy.
Yep.
So what do you guys need to know and understand about TRT when it comes to the heart?
Yeah. So I recently had the most comprehensive advanced cardio testing you can have done by a doctor named Dr. Mark Twyman. I went out and visited Victory Men's Health in St. Louis, and they ran all that testing for me. And I was concerned before I did the test, not from my testosterone use, but I went through a very traumatic period in my life prior to TRT, and I was worried that had done a number on my heart. Everything came back absolutely perfect, which I was absolutely stoked with. But one of the concerns that people have, and I guess the answer to the question is test, not guess. So if people are concerned about their cardiovascular health, one of the worst things I see people do is try to extrapolate meaning from their lipid panel and go, because my LDL's this and my triglycerides are that and my ApoB is this, it means you guys are all too chicken shit afraid to go and just get a fucking scan and see what's going on in there. It's like coming up with all these hypotheses to be like, oh, there could be a monster under my bed. Oh, no, there's not. It's like you're too afraid to just look.
Just look.
Yeah. So when in doubt, test it. When it comes to blood testing for cardiovascular health, it's really just an indicator to be like, fuck, do I need to get my shit together in terms of diet and exercise? Or do I need to scan this? That's really all that is. It's just an indicator to say, do we need to escalate this further? So TRT, so testosterone when done correctly in terms of optimizing physiological levels is cardioprotective. There's a reason why more people suffer cardiovascular events later in life than early in life, and it's because sex hormones are protective. They are anti-aging. So testosterone is protective against the 4 primary diseases of aging, which are diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer, and dementia. And all these things do have things in common, mainly the fact that they share issues with inflammation and insulin resistance. So if you take too much testosterone, it will absolutely stress your heart. It will give you a bigger heart, and not in a good, compassionate way. It's physically bigger and it's a problem. So when it comes to optimizing cardiovascular health, there's a couple of components that people need to look at. One is that you need to make sure that you are delivering stable, optimal levels of androgens. Too much or too little, it needs to be in that Goldilocks zone to be cardioprotective. I think that some people confuse hormone optimization and pharmaceutical medications. When it comes to pharmaceutical medications, we want to take the minimal effective dose. When it comes to hormone optimization, we want to take the maximally effective dose to be able to optimize the benefits that we get from treatment without shooting through the roof and causing issues. So if you want to be walking around, and this is the crux of what I'm speaking about in the keynote tomorrow, is that if you want to have the optimal levels of testosterone that a male your age and your health could possibly have, you have to meet the medicine halfway and be the guy who would be making those levels if he could. That's the thing that people are getting wrong. And when people get that wrong, it causes side effects. And it is really that simple as like an overarching umbrella concept, which is that the gap between the levels of testosterone that you're injecting and the level of the testosterone that your body would naturally be making, this is the side effect zone. So one of the main issues that people need to wrap their heads around with this is that if you want to have optimal testosterone levels, which most men do, you have to have optimal cardiovascular health to, one, earn it, because there's no way you'd be making it if you didn't, but two, to be able to tolerate it, because testosterone causes a therapeutic increase in red blood cells. This is not the same as something like polycythemia. This is so that the body can actually achieve more nutrients in the mitochondria. But when it comes to having blood that's got elevated red blood cell count, we need to have the cardiovascular system be efficient and effective in doing its role, which is to pump blood around the body. So blood pressure is a great proxy of this. If you have elevated blood pressure, it's basically saying you have a cardiovascular health deficiency. Just like if you're getting, a sore lower back, the solution is to strengthen up the back, a weak core, all these kind of things. If people have high blood pressure, the solution isn't, oh, I need to take a medication. I've got, familial hypertension, which is a cop-out. It's saying, I need to do more cardiovascular exercise. And if you are having high blood pressure just from like walking around and doing day-to-day stuff, your existence is so much more stressful than it should be. And this is just the kind of, the micro little injury where over time builds up, and then you get a problem. So I fucking hate cardio. I hate cardio more than anyone else. I only started doing cardio because I used to be a singer. So I was getting out of breath on stage. That's when I learned that you had to do cardio. And then I was like, I feel so much better when I have better cardiovascular health. So a lot of people think about cardio as just a tool to manipulate calories out. That's ridiculous. Some people think that if you do cardio, you're going to lose your gains. Maybe if you're a marathon runner, but not to the point that we're looking at here. It's not going to be an issue. If anything, it should help with performance. But cardio is just something that has to be done. And people go, oh, I don't like doing cardio. And I say, well, you have to do it anyway. And that's just the end of the discussion.
Yeah.
So cardio needs to be done. It needs to be optimized. You have to find the form of cardio that you hate the least, and you need to do it more. For me, I like doing sprints on the Echo bike or the rowing machine. I've got one of each in my basement. I like going for long walks, and I like doing the elliptical because I can just kind of zone out, put my music in, and just chill. But cardio produces a endogenous release of something called anandamide, which is your body's natural version of basically cannabis. It's an endocannabinoid high. It's called the runner's high. And what you want to do, if you've never done cardio before, and it feels horrible, it doesn't mean you shouldn't do cardio. It's like if you've never stretched and you're like, oh, this feels terrible, it means I shouldn't stretch. No, it means you need to do more of it. So the worse cardio feels, the more you need it. But what you want to do is you want to get to the point where cardio feels good and you look forward to it. That does happen. I never thought it would, but it does happen. If you can get to the point that you can do about 20, 30 minutes of steady state, that's when your body will produce that endocannabinoid high. That's when you get that runner's high where you're like, oh, I could do this forever. Most people don't have the cardiovascular fitness to reach that threshold, which is why it's just suffering the entire time.
It just sucks.
So if you can get to the point where it doesn't suck, and then you get out of it and you go, oh, I feel way better now than I felt before, that creates this really important positive feedback loop. So cardio is something that you need to get to the point that you enjoy it. You need to get to the point that you're addicted to it. And then eventually you'll get lazy and you'll stop doing it. You'll realize that you feel like shit, and then you'll go back to doing it repeatedly because you've learned that lesson.
Yeah, my new complex that I live in the gym, they have this thing. It's like this cross trainer elliptical thing.
Yeah.
And I fucking love it.
Yeah.
Because you can do big long strides, but then immediately go into steps.
More independent.
But immediately go into like stairs.
Yep.
Because it's got these like independent like foot things, and it kind of like, I hate cardio too, but I'm finding new ways to make it more fun.
Yeah.
Right. And that thing, I was like, wow, this is great. Like I can do these big long strides and then do like a little bit of HIIT and then, all that stuff.
Yeah.
I think it's so interesting. We have a guy right now. His name is Sean Swarner. He is running his first of 7 marathons in 7 days on 7 continents today in Antarctica.
Okay.
He is running it right now, actually. And we took him through, I trained him through this entire process. And I told him, because he was worried about, getting super skinny and all this stuff. I was like, the way that we're going to train you, I'm going to put muscle mass on you for this. I need you to have the maximum amount of muscle mass when we do this, because you're going to lose a bunch of muscle when you do 7 marathons in 7 days. Like, so I want to offset that immediately. And, so I think it's great that, that you mentioned that, because, he was like, man, I feel like I look great now. And I've never run so much in my entire life. And, so good luck, Sean, by the way. He's running in negative 25 degree weather right now. So
when you hit that runner's high, is that an indication that, cool, you've done what you need to do for the day, or should you stay in it for a while? Like do you want to hold on to that? What do you do once you reach it?
I think that's a good question. And I don't think that the point of diminishing returns for cardio is setting in for a lot of people. I think that it's kind of like steps. It's like we look at we should be aiming for 10,000 steps a day. It doesn't mean that steps past 10,000 are redundant or wasteful.
Right.
If anything, the point of diminishing returns for steps is actually a lot higher. I think when you get into that runner's high, I think that's the point where that's your body indicating that this is a good activity for health. Your body is giving you positive feedback to go, yep, this is good. And that's something that should be done until, I think there is a point that you can overdo the cardio, but I think sessions of about half an hour to 60 minutes, somewhere within that range. I like doing it daily, but I mean, a few times a week is totally fine as well. I think the more important thing to look at with cardio is that cardio is a tool to improve cardiovascular fitness. So just like deadlifting is a tool to get stronger, cardio is a tool to get fitter. So the way that I like to look at cardio is I like to look at it just like progressive overload. So, if I'm going to be doing elliptical workouts, I might pick a range of, let's say 30 to 40 minutes. And then I'll start on, level 5, and then I'll do that for 30. Then once I get 40 minutes on that, then I'll put it up to level 6 and level 7. And you can log it and keep that score in your phone. I think a lot of people just do cardio as like a dawdling kind of thing to just go, oh, I'm just going to meet the requirement for this. But the goal of the cardio should be to train the cardiovascular system. So I think working in different ranges, working with different intensities and building that up over time is important. But I think that runner's high is more of a signal of going, hey, this is good, keep doing this, not, oh, you've reached the point of, backing off.
Yeah, we kind of hack that with our clients. Most of them do some sort of incline treadmill walking. Because it's the easiest way to progress. It's the easiest way to, for them to find that real nice happy medium where they're not super uncomfortable, but they're still pushing it a little bit. And then, a lot of them find that when they're 30 or 45 minutes in, they're like, they go up a couple inclines, and they try to push it a little bit, and then that's perfect. So
that's a great explanation. I appreciate that, because I find it about 20 minutes for me. Usually if I'm doing like an incline, you like 10 and maybe 3.4 or something, around that 20-minute mark, I'm sweating well. But then I'm kind of like not annoyed by it anymore. And when I get to my 25-minute mark, which is usually where I end it, sometimes I'm only ending it because I need to go into my workout because I have stuff to do for the day. But sometimes that's when it feels the best. I'm like, I don't really want to end right now. Like I suffered through 15 to 18 minutes of not really having a great time. Now it feels amazing. So I'm going to look at it differently now and identify the days where I can do maybe up to 40, especially when it feels good like that. Because I agree, if that feedback is coming from the body, it's just like bad feedback. You eat something that makes you gassy and bloated and miserable, you shouldn't eat it. That's your body's feedback. If we're getting good feedback from the endorphins of this runner's high, why not feed that a little bit more?
Completely.
I like that a lot. You said something earlier that I think one of my last questions here for you is, it's really, how did you say it? You said the pharmacy supplements rather should be like a smaller portion or should be minimized, but we should be really filling in the other part of the equation with who we are as men and how we operate with our habits and everything. And that was kind of a perfect tee. I have a gift for you here, a book called The Way of Men. I don't know if you've read this or not.
I read it many years ago, but my copy of it is in Australia. So this is one that I can take home. So
good, because there's the 4 things that they talk about in here are strength, courage, mastery, and honor. And you mentioned mastering kind of yourself earlier. So if you would kind of expand on that a little bit, because we are huge on habits. Like you can have the best nutrition, the best fitness plan. You can have the best protocol in the world, but your habits can absolutely sabotage your progress. So for you, what does it mean filling in the other part of, okay, now I got my pharma, I have my nutrition, I have all this stuff. What are some of the most important things for a man to really master?
Yeah, I think that the way that I look at it is that purpose is a really important foundation for daily habits, because the guy who sets the alarm at 5 a.m. versus the guy who has the alarm go off at 5 a.m. are two very different people. And it's the purpose that overcomes the, I guess, the immediate self-sabotage that can happen. And it's the purpose that drives doing what you need to do, not what you want to do.
Mhm.
So I think purpose is very important. And I think most men are more purposeful and more passionate about their purpose when it's an outward driven purpose. So I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing this for my family. I'm doing this for my wife. I'm doing this for my kids. I'm doing this for the greater good. And I think that that's really important. And for me, that was the thing that drove my habits. And I'm very big on purpose. My purpose is to leave the world a better place than I found it. And so that I want to feel that the world was a better place because I lived in it. And that is what allows me to continue to do the things on a day-to-day level that I don't feel like doing at the time, but afterwards I feel accomplished. And when I go to bed at the end of the night, I don't have that voice that used to keep me up in my mind that's kind of telling me that I'm guilty or I should feel ashamed because I'm capable of more. I go to bed proud of myself every day. And I think that it's important to recognize that that voice in your head does not give out participation medals. He knows who you are when no one's around. He knows if you keep your word to yourself. And I think that if you can't keep your word to yourself, then no one will respect you if you don't respect yourself. So I think that's very important. And all of these things form the foundation for what your daily habits are. I'm very big on reverse engineering. So I used to work in digital marketing, back when Facebook ads were first a thing. I used to be making Facebook ad campaigns. And what we would look at is going, okay, we've got a goal, and we've got where people are starting as cold traffic. How do we get them from here to here? And the easiest way to do that is to start here and work backwards. So start with the goal and then work back. And the way that I got to the point that I'm at now, and the good thing about self-development is that it's a never-ending journey. And I got to the point where I was like, who is the ideal version of myself? And I visualized every aspect of this guy. So I was like, what does he look like? How does he speak? What's his body language? What's his daily routine? Every aspect of this person. And I looked at myself and went, okay, what are small habits that I can start to adopt day to day that this guy does that I don't do? Because it's the habits that we do day to day that make us who we are. Mm-hmm. And I was realizing that I was maybe doing some stuff, once a week or twice a week, but I was just sabotaging that by just how I was showing up every day. So I think the way that you hack habits is that you take pride in the journey, not the end destination. If it's all just prolonging gratification for the end result, then it's really a willpower thing. And willpower is pretty finite. But if you can take pride in being the person who's going through the process, and my friend Ali Gilbert is the best example of this. Ali's awesome. Every time I've been out for dinner with her, at every restaurant, we went to these awesome American barbecue places and steak houses and some of the best food I have ever indulged in my entire life. I mean, I see why everyone in this country is so fat. I never saw her go off her plan once. I mean, she's there at the barbecue place with grilled turkey and asparagus and shit. I've never seen someone who is so regimented. I mean, we were at Disney World for a whole day. I did not this bitch did not break. And
she told us about that.
Yeah. I mean, I lived with her for a month. I mean, I saw everything. But the thing that I saw her do, whether she was conscious of it or not, is that she was taking pride in not breaking her plan. And I would argue that her doing that in that moment and taking pride in that probably delivered her more pleasure, more dopamine, more endorphins than the mouth pleasure of eating whatever she felt like having at the time. And I think that that's the way that you hack it, because it's when we're surrounded by other people or when we're in, circumstances which are not ideal, that's when we tend to fail. And I think the best measure of your character and values is how well you can keep your word to yourself under stress and under adversity. So I think being proud of being the person who is keeping his word to himself and staying on track, if you can get pleasure and passion and be proud of that in that moment, I think that's how you hack keeping on track.
Yeah.
And for me, the habits that have made the biggest difference is walking outside as much as possible. Doesn't matter what the weather is, getting as many steps outside as I possibly can, learning as much as I can. So, going for a walk, listening to podcasts consistently over time, stretching and mobility every day. I got to the point with my back 2 years ago where I was in so much pain with it every day. I was like, if I'd been the guy who did stretching and mobility every day for the last year, I wouldn't be in this mess. And I was like, well, I need to start that now. So I kept my word to myself that every day I would do at least 10 or 15 minutes of stretching and mobility. And I've kept that. And those kind of things for me make a big difference. So it's the daily stretching and mobility, it's the activity. And then I think what's also important for men to do is to be serving their community or serving their family or something like that. So it's not all just about you, because I find that I feel the most at peace, the happiest, and the most present when I am helping other people, because it gets me out of my own head and my own kind of selfish desires. So you are your habits, you are what you do day to day. And if you can rein those habits in and understand the importance of them and stay consistent with it, it's not a miserable way to live, because you feel so much better and you're so proud of the person that you are. And then you end up building this positive momentum. And I think that momentum is the cure for a lot of people's depression and anxiety. You don't need to be at the destination. You just need to be a few steps towards it and on a roll. And I think that that momentum for men, like if we've got a goal and we've got a challenge and we're making progress towards that challenge and we're pushing outside our comfort zone and we're moving towards that, I think there's more pleasure in building the castle than sitting on top of it when it's done.
That's what guys need to realize, is that you can actually get the fulfillment, the excitement, and the pleasure from even something as simple as not eating the shit at dinner.
Yep.
Or from doing the things you say you're going to do along whatever process or journey that you're on.
Yep.
Because a lot of people eat or drink alcohol or smoke weed to get that pleasure. But it's like you can actually get that same feeling, that dopamine hit. You can get that from actually doing things that are better for you and good for you, especially serving yourself, your family, serving your community. Like imagine if you were able to replace things that are dangerous and dirty and unhealthy for your body with things that are still giving you the same pleasure and dopamine. That's crazy.
That to me is the biohack.
That's the biohack. It 100% is. Like you can actually, by doing these things, live even a better life. And because a lot of times, like with our Earn Your Booze thing, is people are like, well, I don't know, that's what I like to do. That's where I get my fun and get my excitement. It's like, well, dude, if your life is already badass, you wouldn't need to drink just to try to find that pleasure and that excitement. And then if you did choose to drink, it's just adding to an already awesome life, and you do it a little bit every once in a while and like, cool, you know? So dude, very well said. That was great. Well, this has been an incredible conversation, Dave. Can't thank you enough for being here. We're going to see you at the Silverback Summit.
Oh, fantastic. So I'll see you guys there tomorrow and Saturday.
What day? Are you speaking both days?
I'm opening tomorrow, and then I'm doing some panel discussions both days. So there'll be at least some of me every day, but the main speech I'm doing is tomorrow morning at 8:30.
Awesome. Okay, sweet. So anyone who wants to get in contact with you, everything is down below wherever you're listening to this or watching this. So just click. You're already going to get a ton of value out of this podcast. So
absolutely. And for anyone who's made it to the end, the point that I say in all my podcasts is that all my ebooks are $29 Australian, which is like $3 US or something. I think it's about 15 at the moment.
Okay.
If anyone can't afford the ebooks and wants a copy of the ebooks, send me an email and I will send them to you for free.
Man, what a stand-up guy.
Awesome.
Hey, thanks so much for joining us, my man.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right. Cheers.